Okay, so I'm just going to let you all know, normally we're done around 11:10 or so. It may be 11:15 today because, well, I'm just getting started and it's 10 till the hour and we have that whole communion thing to do afterwards. All right, so here is a very exciting story. And this scripture passage has led me to paths this week that I had no idea I would be going on. And what I've discovered this week is just blowing my mind and exciting every cell in my body. So let me just go ahead and share it with you rather than talk about that. All right. About 8 days after Jesus said this, he took Peter, John, and James with him and went up onto a mountain to pray. As he was praying, the appearance of his face changed, and his clothes became as bright as a flash of lightning. 2 men, Moses and Elijah, appeared in glorious splendor talking with Jesus. They spoke about his departure, which he was about to bring to fulfillment at Jerusalem. Peter and his companions were very sleepy, but when they became fully awake, all right, that's not in there just by accident. When they became fully awake, they saw his glory and the 2 men standing with him. As the men were leaving Jesus, Peter said to him, "Master, it is good for us to be here. Let us put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." He did not know what he was saying, which was often true about Peter. While he was speaking, a cloud appeared and covered them, and they were afraid as they entered the cloud. And a voice came from the cloud saying, "This is my son, whom I have chosen. Listen to him." When the voice had spoken, they found that Jesus was alone. The disciples kept this to themselves and did not tell anyone at the time what they had seen. I saw a documentary by Martin Scorsese on George Harrison, the Beatle. I think, with all confidence, probably one of the greatest pop bands in history. Amy and I were at the Hollywood studios, and they were having a big street party, and it was mostly full of young people, and they were playing the song Beatles' Twist and Shout, thinking, Amy, that song is 50 years old, and it's still good music, right? George Harrison, back in the day of the Beatles, when they were trying to transcend from the drug scene, they went into the transcendent meditation scene, and they went to India, and that's where they started meeting the gurus and so forth. Well, for the rest of the Beatles, it really didn't stick, but for George Harrison, it did. George Harrison was so fascinated. He bought this huge English estate, and he did most of the planting. He spent hours and hours planting and gardening and putting trees and writing music, and just a fascinating individual. He had cancer, and when he discovered that it was now terminal, he was not going to survive his cancer, he told his wife, "This is like one of the biggest events in the human experience. I'm going to prepare myself to experience it completely." Now, George Harrison was a person who meditated a lot, but he spent hours and hours and hours meditating, preparing himself for the moment when his soul left his body. He would be ready for it. His wife shared this story, that on the early morning when he died, it was still dark outside. And she said, in the moment his soul left his body, everyone in the room could tell, because the room lit up and there were no lights on. Great story. Recently, a friend of mine lost her father. And my friend is not a religious person, very intuitive and very connected in wonderful creative ways, but not religious at all. And as she was in the hospice center with her mother and her sister, and as she was watching her father, when he breathed his last breath, she saw a flame of light leave his body. And she said, did you all see that? No one else did, but she knows what she saw. Her telling that experience then led for me on Facebook to come across an article about quantum physics and quantum physicists regarding the human soul, and about how scientifically they're starting to show that the soul or one's consciousness continues to live after life. These are scientists. This is why I'm so excited, and I'm having to force myself to speak as slowly as I can. Because if I were speaking like I'm thinking right now, it would sound very much like this. It sounds very much like the disclaimer after every drug commercial you see on TV. It led me to an article by a doctor named Dr. Lanza, who was doing cell research when he was a teenager in his basement. He is one of the pioneers on stem cell research. Through his research and his science and biology, he has created programmed cells that you can put into the human body, that they call them ambulance cells. These cells will find damaged tissue in the body and work their way toward it, and then start immediately restructuring and recreating the tissue to bring healing. They tried an experiment with dogs who had lost their eyesight. They dyed these cells green so they could watch their path. Within 24 hours, every cell they injected into the dog found the damaged tissue around the retina, and the dog was able to then to see and regain its sight. The same process has been done on humans now. And some, after 4 years, according to the article, I don't remember the date of it, but even after 4 years, people who have retina degeneration and who had lost their eyesight was restored and they can still see. This guy is smart. He has been able to clone blood vessels so that people no longer have to lose their hands and their feet because they don't get enough circulation. So the body is able to take these cells, which then will create new pathways for the blood to flow, and people are able to keep their limbs. This guy is very smart. This guy also went from being a biologist and a pioneer in STEM research to become also a theorist about the beginnings of the universe. This is where he takes a different stand. Science, for the last 100 years, believes that the universe was created with a big bang. And all the energy from something about the size of a frozen pea was just so full of energy and so hot that it made this huge explosion. And over billions of years, different kinds of chemicals and gases formed together, and they created these rare planets and solar systems and galaxies. And that in one place we call Earth, that by accident, all of these different chemicals, carbon, H2O, all of these things started to come together, and then eventually the environment was just right for simple cells to form life. And that from those simple cells, more complex cells, until you become, to you and me, complex persons, right? Well, one of the things that Dr. Lanza is pointing out is in that theory, there's no explanation whatsoever in consciousness. Sure, we could just become living beings, complex organisms, but what about our consciousness? And what he was able to start showing is that nothing in the world around you would exist if you did not what? Observe it. So he is changing science and the origins of the universe to what he calls biocentric theory. In other words, the universe was not created by an random act of an explosion, but rather it was created through consciousness. Because he says when you look at the universe, it seems to exist perfectly for human life. He said if the Big Bang had just been 1/1,000,000th stronger than it was, what we have now wouldn't exist. There are over 200 parameters necessary for life to exist upon this planet. If any of those 200 parameters were slightly modified, life would not exist. In other words, It's consciousness that created what we see in the world around us. Now, I can see you all are just as thrilled as I was to discover this. All right, let's put this in terms that we might understand. If I were to ask you, what did you have for dinner last night? And let's just say, randomly, one of you says, spaghetti with meatballs. Oh, wonderful. What did that spaghetti and meatballs look like? You would form a picture immediately in your mind, would you not? What was the environment like? It was a wonderful restaurant in Manhattan. We were on vacation. The music was playing. What the sound? Oh, the sounds of people enjoying conversation and good food and the smell. Oh, wow. Garlic and wine. Oh, and in your mind, you are what? Reliving that experience. Is it literally there anymore? No, but it exists in your what? Consciousness. If you were not conscious of that event, it would not exist. Another example. Let's say I'm sitting on the beach and the sun is coming up over the ocean, and the sun is at that beautiful place, where the sky turns orange and pink and all those beautiful colors, and it's just the breeze from the ocean. I could hear the waves crashing, and I said, this is so beautiful, I want to take a photo. Or, and when I show you the photo, I realize that just as I took the picture, a seagull flew into the picture. And you are so excited about my picture, you say, let's go look at it right now. But it would no longer be there, right? Because I caught a moment of time and space. You with me? Okay. So what we observe is the reality we create. If you were to go outside and look at the red roses, you would have a very specific image of what that red rose looks like. Some of you can see it right now, right? Well, what if you were a bee? Would that rose that you see be different than it? You betcha. Don't they have lots more little things to focus on, and they don't see light the same way we do? They see infrared. But that's its reality. You know those chameleons that have eyes like Marty Feldman? What would this room look like if you could see over here and back here at the same time? I can't even imagine. But that chameleon is creating its reality as it observes the world, and it's different than the one we create. All right? Hang in there. This is leading to a point. What quantum physicists and theorists are starting to recognize is there must be something beyond time and space. That who and what we are is more than just a random act of events. And they're starting to pinpoint that in the human brain where they're able to see where consciousness or the soul exists. For example, you can go through anesthesia. They shut down your conscious self, but do you cease to exist when that happens? No. They're saying that this is like a vehicle, a vessel. I drive a red Solara with a black convertible top. When I'm in the car, I'm in my Solara, right? When I step out of the car, do I cease to exist? If I change into another car, do I become somebody different? If it's a Ferrari, yes, maybe. Are you coming with me on this now? And they're starting to see that even though the human body may change or die, consciousness does not. That there seems to be a collective consciousness in the universe, a consciousness which created the universe. All right? You hanging in there with me? Okay. I pay 99 cents a month with Apple to buy more memory in the cloud. I have a computer that has memory. If a virus were to attack my computer, if I get mad with it because it's not working right and I throw it against the wall and break my computer, guess what? All the information on my computer, does it cease to exist? No. Simultaneously, while it's in this piece of hardware, it exists in the cloud. You're starting to see what I mean. Dr. Lanza believes, and other quantum physicists believe, that it is consciousness that is the fabric of the universe. and that what we observe is what is created. I'll give you an experiment. Some of you may remember this from science class, but I've just discovered it, and it's fascinating. You have two screens. You have a screen here, and you have one here. On the screen here, it has one slit in it, and then there's a screen behind it. Over here, you have like a gun that can shoot marbles randomly. Just every marble that goes through the slit will create a pattern on the board behind it, which is a straight line. What would happen if we put two slits in this board? They shot the marbles, and sure enough, you had two patterns, just the same on the line. What would happen if we send a wave? So they send a wave, and as it's going through the one slit, it created the same pattern on the back, just like the marbles. Oh, what would happen if we put two slits? When they sent the wave through the two slits, it didn't create two parallel lines. It created lines across the whole spectrum. So waves act differently than solid material. So then they take it into the quantum world, where they take an electron, like a little marble. They shoot the electrons randomly, and the ones that go through the one slot, create one line. This is interesting, they say. Let's try it now with two. Randomly, they shoot electrons, and they go through the two slots, but guess what happened to the image on the back? It wasn't two parallel, it was the whole wavelengths. So what happened when they shot one electron like a little tiny, like a microscopic marble, and it didn't behave the same way? One way it behaves like a particle, another way it behaves like a wave. They thought, well, we're smart, we're scientists. Let's assume that maybe the particles, the electrons, are colliding with each other, changing their form and their shape before they get through the slots. Let's just shoot one at a time. Boom, 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 boom. With one slot, the electrons create that beautiful straight line behind the screen. Two slots. Boom, 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 boom. It creates the whole spectrum. This is mathematically impossible. There's no explanation for it. So remember, they're scientists. They're very smart. They say, let's do this. Let's observe what's happening to the particle before it gets to the slot. So they shoot the particles, the electrons, one at a time through the double slot. And what happens next is unexplainable. While they were observing it, the end result on the board back were two parallel lines. The electrons behaved differently simply by observation. This is the context of Dr. Lanza's idea of a biocentric universe. It is our consciousness that creates the reality around us. It is a supreme consciousness that created the universe for us, rather than we just being a random act. All right? You still awake? What in the world does this have to do with the Mount of Transfiguration? Some of you still may be asking that question right now. Jesus and his three favorite disciples, Peter, James, and John, go up to a mountain to pray. That's significant in biblical speak. They went to a high place where they're closer to God. The disciples are tired, as they always are, and they are very sleepy. And as they're about to slumber, they notice that Jesus' face changes and his clothing changes, and he becomes like lightning. And not only is he there, but there are two other figures that are this bright energy light. Here's the connection. And this is why I get excited. Was Jesus conjuring up Moses and Elijah from their graves? Are they standing there as ghosts? No, they're standing there as very much alive energies, communing with one another. Jesus is pure energy, Moses and Elijah are pure energy. Theoretical physicists think that because of what they've observed with electrons and how consciousness can change reality, that there are probably parallel universes. Here I am in this universe speaking to you and sharing what I'm thinking in another universe. Maybe I'm writing it in a book and you're sitting down and reading it, you see? So what they're saying now, the theologians, the biblical writers, and the quantum physicists are all saying something very similar. That's why I take notice, because you see, I don't believe truth can be compartmentalized in one tiny little container. It's everywhere. And whenever I see people of different disciplines, of different vocabularies, of different life experiences saying something that's the same, I take notice. I think to myself, there's probably truth here. And this truth can set me free and change my life. Jesus wasn't calling Elijah and Moses from the grave, and they weren't ghosts. They were very much alive. And they turned into their real selves, their consciousness of pure energy. Any of you see the movie Powder? You remember this kid who had these incredible abilities as he's running through the lightning storm? When he finally disappears, he disappears in what? A burst of light. You and I are energy. And though the vehicle may change or may die altogether, your consciousness goes into the great cloud in the sky. And that your consciousness remains forever. Are you with me? What the disciples witnessed and what they wrote in the first century, they didn't have quantum physicists to help them explain. I read an interview by Dr. Lanza and Deepak Chopra. And Deepak Chopra said that when he was reading Dr. Lanza's book on biocentric universe, that it reminded him when he grew up in India from the Hindu tradition, it was called the Vedanta. I am not in my mind, but my mind is in me. I am not in my body, but my body is in me. I am not in the world, but the world is in me. I am not in the universe, but the universe is in me. Now I've got Jesus religion, I've got Hindu religion, and I've got quantum physics, and I've got biologists and theoretical physicists saying something very similar. I take notice, and I want you to as well. So what are the implications here? I got to get a drink of water. This has the potential to change your life, as it's changing mine. What I observe in the world becomes my reality. If my life experience makes my observations that everything is harsh, everything is unfair, everything is ugly, and there's injustice everywhere, guess what kind of life I'm probably living? One which there's harshness, unfairness, but you have another person who lives in the same world, maybe in the same neighborhood, and everything they say is miraculous. Everything that they see is mystical. Everything that they see is beauty. And you look at their lives, you say, why are they so happy? They live in the same place I do. Because what you observe is the reality you create. What they are observing is the reality they create. Viktor Frankl wrote Man's Search for Meaning, a life-changing book for me. He is a survivor of the Holocaust, and how he observed the Holocaust created a whole new brand of psychology. You see? Where other people just suffered, and many of them just died. The same experience, but he observed things around him differently. How would your life change if you were to see yourself as pure energy, like lightning? There are people here who can see auras. Now, they don't tell you they can. They tell me because they know I'm weird enough not to be surprised by it. And what they tell me is that when I preach sometimes, depending on how I am feeling, that my aura is big and sometimes it's small. They tell me that I will go and do this over here, And my aura will stay over there and then eventually catch up with me. And then, you see? There are people who can see this energy. Because you don't observe it, then for you it doesn't what? Exist. For those people who can see it and observe it, for them it does exist. So what if we were to look at ourselves as not so much as human beings on this planet having to deal with life and suffering and struggle and challenge, but what if we were to see ourselves as this incredible energy that can exist in all worlds at the same time? Human beings created time and space to be able to measure our experiences, but who we are transcends time and space. When we die and we go to that eternal place, that eternal consciousness, it's not that you check in and then you live for the rest of your life on an eternal timeline. It's all happening at once, you see. You can exist in many places at one time. And what if we were to start living our lives in such a way that we become conscious that we are this incredible energy, and that we are connected to the same consciousness that created the heavens and the earth? How would that change your life? You wouldn't have to pray, "Oh God, I hope you hear my prayers," because you are now conscious of the fact that you are intimately connected to that consciousness. You see what I'm saying? You don't have to worry about, "Oh God, do you see me? And God, do you hear me?" Because you are a part of that divine force that created everything in the first place. I know, I sound crazy, but that's okay. It's my job. I have to be a little crazy so that you will wake up and see that you don't have to wait for God to change your life, but because you are consciously connected to God, you can observe the world differently and create what? Change. You are intimately connected to the consciousness that created everything for life to exist. You like that? I can see you thinking. Anybody here drive standard shift cars? You know when you don't pull the clutch out all the way, you get that kind of burn smell? I'm smelling a little bit of that right now. Your clutch is not out all the way yet, but that's all right. Because what I'm wanting to do is plant a seed for you to go to that place. What do I observe, and what reality do I create? Quantum physicists just call it consciousness. Theologians call it God. Jesus talked about the Spirit. Isn't that all the same thing, whether you call it Theos or Pneumos, Theos? Isn't it all the same? It's a consciousness. It's an energy force. Yeah, it's an energy. And if you're not experiencing that energy, it's because you haven't started to do what? Observe it. Connect to it. But once you do, no matter what happens to the computer or to the car or to the vessel, the consciousness remains. So Jesus was speaking with very live entities, full energy and life, wondering how he needed to fulfill his plans on this planet. You have that same potential to connect with energy that transcends time and space. Because who you are is more than this planet you're living on. But who you are is as eternal as God is. Yeah. You are powerful beyond your knowledge. You have capabilities that you haven't even connected to yet. Yeah, you do. Now, I already see somebody pointing, oh, maybe he does, but no, you do. Because we all come from the same what? Consciousness. Let us pray. God, I remember in one of the Bible stories it said when Jesus resurrected, an earthquake and a powerful light blinded the guards, and they fell like dead men. Help us, O God. The consciousness of all creation, to help us to become more keenly aware of who we truly are, and allow our minds to step out of time and space and to see ourselves as a part of the very beginning of this universe. May we live with greater knowledge and greater power, greater consciousness, and may we truly all become enlightened and observe the world we're in from our power and our strength and our creativity. May we turn our lives around to observe this world, and not in bad health or disappointments, but in spite of the things that happen, to see ourselves able to transcend it and rise above it. For that is what we're really made of. And as we take communion with each other this morning, as we take the elements, why not in our imagination see how we become one with the body of Christ, the one with his consciousness, the one with his essence, who is one with you, O God, and that makes us one with you as well. Let us make that jump and that leap as we do something so familiar to ourselves that sometimes we don't realize we're doing it. But today it will be different. Today it will be different. Now, God, lead us and guide us and continue to reveal your glorious conscience to us in so many glorious ways. Amen.